How did one trade lead to the Dallas Cowboys dynasty in the 90s? The Vikings let the Cowboys into the kitchen, kick up their feet, and have a sandwich. They would mortgage the future for one player, Herschel Walker, and it did not pay off. Walker initially spent 3 years in the United States Football League and then joined the Cowboys when the league folded in 1986. In his first 3 years in the NFL, he averaged 4.4 yards per carry with a total of 3,142 yards. Although Walker was elite, they had just finished 1-15 and were now 0-5 in the 1989 season. Head coach Jimmy Johnson thought a full rebuild was necessary. Walker was their only star player, so many were concerned about trading him. But the Cowboys were 0-5, so Johnson thought, things need to be changed. And in 1989, the Cowboys drafted a player in the supplementary draft that meant they forfeited their 1990 first round pick. And sitting at 0-5, it would not be a good look if the Cowboys were the worst team in the league but didn't have the number 1 pick or top 10 pick. The Cowboys were looking to build out their roster. They already had rising stars Troy Aikman and Michael Irvin. For Minnesota, the trade was an attempt to get to the Super Bowl. They went to the NFC title game and lost to the Redskins in 1987, and in 1988, they lost in the divisional round to the 49ers. At the time of the trade, general manager Michael Lynn thought the Vikings were a key piece away from the Super Bowl. And there was precedent for a trade like this. A couple years earlier, the Rams traded Eric Dickerson to the Colts for 3 first-round picks, 3 second-round picks, and 2 players. Dickerson won the rushing title in 1988, Walker came second. The first offer was from the Browns though. It included a player, 2 future number 1 picks, and 3 number 2s. A good offer, but Johnson tried his luck with another team, and that's where the Vikings came in. Saying all this, although Walker didn't have a no-trade clause, he could retire, so the Cowboys went out of their way to satisfy him. And that included an agreement of $1.25 million in cash, a home in Minnesota, a Mercedes-Benz, and some clothes. He didn't have to accept the offer, but Jerry Jones said he loved Dallas. There's no doubt in my mind that he wanted to help us out. The trade was the following. The Cowboys received linebacker Jesse Solomon, linebacker David Howard, cornerback Isaiah Colt, defensive end Alex Stewart, 3 first-round picks, 3 second-round picks, a third-round pick, and a 6th-round pick. The Vikings received Herschel Walker, 2 third-round picks, a 5th-round pick, and a 10th round pick. So what made this trade so great? Well, firstly, Herschel Walker wouldn't continue the peak performance he had while at the Cowboys. He only played 2 years for the Vikings and never surpassed 1,000 yards. Ironically, he actually finished his career with the Cowboys. Full circle. If the Vikings were able to go and win a Super Bowl with Walker as a key piece, then we might not be telling this story. The other side of the trade was the Cowboys, and it would turn the Cowboys from the worst team in the league to winning 3 Super Bowls within 7 years. The birth of a dynasty. In the trade, the players the Cowboys received each had a conditional pick attached. So if the player wasn't on the roster by February 1st, 1990, they'd receive that pick. The Vikings didn't actually anticipate the Cowboys releasing the players to get those picks. The team was bad, right? So they assumed the Cowboys needed the players, but Johnson just wanted draft picks. Many, including Minnesota, initially thought they got the better end of the deal, but they'd be wrong. Darren Nelson would be traded after refusing to go to Dallas. Alex Stewart was cut for a 2nd-round pick, but they'd ultimately keep Holt, Howard, and Solomon. The Vikings received 2 draft picks from the Cowboys. Dallas was then able to package Minnesota's picks with their own selections to maneuver around quite a bit in the draft. And with those picks, they drafted Emmitt Smith, Darren Woodson, Russell Maryland, and Kevin Smith, cornerstones of the dynasty. I mean, Emmitt Smith alone would have made this trade worth it, but then you throw in these other key pieces. There's this draft trade value chart, which represents trade value for draft picks, and it was actually developed by Jimmy Johnson. Before this spread across the league, it was the Cowboys' secret weapon for a few years. And if we use this system to evaluate the picks that the Cowboys received, if we just include the first 3 rounds, the Cowboys acquired 4,895 points against the Vikings' 610 points of draft capital. The only highlight of the draft for Minnesota was that they selected wide receiver Jake Reed with a pick from Dallas, and he had a good career with them. The Vikings didn't fall into irrelevancy from this trade. They did make the playoffs 7 times in the 90s, but they were going for a Super Bowl with this trade, and it did not work out that way. So you have Minnesota completely failing with their mission, and the Cowboys building this dynasty. But the real power of the trade didn't actually come from that initial deal. The power of the trade was how well they drafted, and the fact Johnson turned lots of picks into even more. During his 5-year stint with the Cowboys, he made 51 trades, and most of those involved draft picks. Johnson knew what he was doing. Draft picks for the sake of draft picks aren't necessarily useful. In 1989, he took over for the Cowboys with not much notice and drafted Troy Aikman, fullback Daryl Johnston, center Mark Stepnoski, and defensive end Tony Tolbert, all Pro Bowlers and key pieces in the Super Bowl run. After trading with various teams, this is what they were able to haul in. You can see Emmitt Smith and other players we mentioned. And while the Cowboys went on this dynastic run throughout the 90s, the Vikings would not get close to hoisting the Lombardi. And that's the story of the birth of the Cowboys dynasty. Thanks, Minnesota. Alright, thanks for watching.